Egypt has always been a land of mysteries, but every so often something surfaces that is so unusual, so completely unexpected, that it forces archaeologists to question everything they thought they understood about the ancient world. And in 2024, that moment arrived. Under the shifting sands of Saqqara, a Swiss-French team uncovered a sealed tomb, untouched, perfectly preserved, and hidden for more than 4,000 years. They expected a mummy, or at least the remnants of a burial. Instead, the chamber revealed no human remains, no identifiable body, and no intact coffin was recovered after extensive looting. Only walls covered in vivid paintings and inscriptions so well preserved that they looked as if they were carved yesterday. And the more researchers studied them, the stranger the discovery became. The tomb belonged to a man named Teti-Neb-Fu, a royal physician serving during the final years of the Old Kingdom, an era marked by political collapse, famine, environmental instability, and growing local power centres. But Teti was not just another court doctor. His walls listed 3 titles so rare that even Egyptologists struggled to find parallels. He was a conjurer of Serket, the scorpion goddess associated with healing, venom, and forbidden protection rituals. He was director of medicinal plants, a title recorded in fewer than a handful of inscriptions in all of Egyptian history. And he was chief dentist, a position almost never granted to a single individual. One man holding all 3 roles is extraordinary. But what truly shocks researchers is this: someone of such importance received a beautifully decorated tomb, yet was never buried in it. The inscriptions depict complex medical recipes, botanical diagrams, symbols for venoms and antidotes, and scenes that appear to show early surgical procedures. Some formulas resemble primitive antiseptics, wound treatments, or even toxin neutralizers, far beyond typical Old Kingdom medicine. But scattered between these symbols are something else: damaged lines. Entire sections deliberately chiseled out thousands of years ago. This wasn't looting or vandalism, it was precise, controlled erasure. Someone intentionally removed parts of Teti-Neb-Fu's work, the very parts dealing with medicinal plants, venom rituals, and what appear to be advanced healing techniques. Whatever knowledge was once recorded on those walls, someone wanted it gone. And then comes the most unsettling detail of all. There is no sign that the tomb ever held a body. No disturbed wrappings, no resin traces, no fragments of bone, no imprint where a coffin once rested. It is as if Teti-Neb-Fu was never buried there at all. Yet the tomb was prepared specifically for him, complete with offering scenes, priestly depictions, and a full architectural layout reserved for high-ranking members of the royal court. This leaves only 2 possibilities. Either his body was removed long ago, or he died under circumstances that prevented a traditional burial. Both explanations raise more questions than answers, and there is another detail the archaeologists could not ignore. The symbol of Serket, the scorpion goddess, appears throughout the tomb, far more frequently than normal. Serket was a protector, but she was also the deity invoked in rituals involving venom, poisons, and dangerous healing practices. Physicians connected to her cult were believed to possess knowledge that bordered on magical, secretive, or even forbidden. So why does the tomb of such a physician contain medical formulas intertwined with the symbols of a goddess associated with dangerous rites? And why were entire passages deliberately erased? This combination suggests that Teti-Neb-Fu may have possessed knowledge that later priesthoods feared, knowledge involving venom, healing, or rituals considered too powerful or too dangerous to survive. Then archaeologists noticed something even stranger. On one wall, a symbol appeared that scholars had rarely seen before: a fusion of scorpion imagery and plant motifs that do not match any known botanical species from ancient Egypt. These plants may represent extinct varieties or substances used only in the most restricted royal contexts. Some researchers now believe that Teti-Neb-Fu may not have been merely a healer. He may have been experimenting, studying toxins, antidotes, or rituals that pushed against the boundaries of priestly authority, which could explain the erased lines and perhaps why his body vanished. But the mystery doesn't end in this tomb. Similar erasures, chiseled, targeted, deliberate, have been found in other tombs across Egypt. Priests, physicians, officials tied to protective magic, all missing the same types of inscriptions. Different people, different regions, different centuries, the same pattern. A specific branch of knowledge was being erased. Teti-Neb-Fu's tomb is simply the clearest example. A decorated chamber with no burial, knowledge cut away, and a figure whose identity was too important to forget, yet too dangerous to preserve entirely. This leaves a larger, more unsettling question. Was this royal doctor part of a hidden order? A network of healers and ritual practitioners whose work later dynasties feared? Or did he uncover something that threatened the priesthood's control over life, death, and healing? Egyptian history is filled with layers of censorship, but rarely does it target one domain so precisely. And so archaeologists left the tomb asking the same question. Why would ancient Egyptians devote enormous resources to build a tomb for a man they never buried? Near the entrance, one inscription remained untouched, a line the ancient chiselers avoided. May the secrets of Serket be sealed forever beneath the sand. Secrets of healing, secrets of poison, secrets of something else entirely. Whatever it was, Egypt hid it, erased it, and expected it to remain buried. But the sands of Saqqara have shifted again, and Teti-Neb-Fu's empty tomb is only the first piece of a much larger puzzle, one involving missing physicians, suppressed formulas, forbidden rituals, and unexplained patterns stretching across 4 millennia. Before we descend any deeper into this mystery, take a moment to tap the like button. It truly helps the journey continue. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it right now on your side of the story? As always, the visuals are only a guide. The real evidence lies beneath the desert sands. Thank you for being here, and for supporting this channel as we uncover the forgotten world together. This is the beginning of a deeper mystery, and it forces a final question. If this is what lies just beneath the surface, what else is still hidden deeper in the sand? For nearly 1,500 years, every carved symbol inside Egypt's temples and tombs was silent. No scholar, no priest, no ruler understood a single hieroglyph. The language died, the meaning disappeared, and a civilization built on writing became unreadable to its own descendants. But this silence wasn't simply the result of time. It was engineered. And when modern scholars finally cracked the code in the early 1800s, they discovered something far more unsettling than a lost alphabet. They realized that parts of Egypt's written history had been deliberately erased, systematically, repeatedly, and always targeting the same types of knowledge. Everything changed in 1799, when French soldiers uncovered the Rosetta Stone. It seemed harmless at first, one message repeated in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. Scholars assumed translation would be straightforward. It wasn't. It took 20 years, and the reason was quickly apparent. The hieroglyphic text wasn't identical to the Greek. The Egyptian version contained additions, phrases that elevated ordinary statements into divine proclamations, lines that existed only in the hieroglyphic script, alterations that suggested Egypt was rewriting its own record for anyone who could read the sacred language. If the official inscriptions were modified, what else had been changed? That question drove two men, Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, to break the linguistic code. Young noticed that certain symbols spelled foreign names phonetically. Champollion made the final leap, connecting hieroglyphs to the last surviving form of ancient Egyptian, Coptic. On September 14, 1822, the symbols began speaking again. But what they said was not what anyone expected. Across Egypt, as soon as inscriptions could be read, a pattern emerged. Entire lines in tombs had been deliberately chiseled out. Words, sentences, sometimes full passages, removed with precision. This wasn't vandalism, it wasn't robbery, it wasn't erosion, it was censorship. And the missing material wasn't random. Wherever text had been erased, the subject was almost always the same: rituals involving healing, venom, protection, or the specialized work of priest-physicians. The exact categories associated with Teti Neb Fu, the royal doctor whose body vanished from his own tomb. One of the clearest examples came from Abydos, a priest's tomb that originally contained a detailed medical text, now almost completely destroyed. What little remained carried warnings. These words shall not be spoken aloud. Strike out the path that leads to harm. Seal what protects the soul from what dwells beneath. These phrases appear in tombs from Saqqara to Thebes, Luxor, and Giza, always linked to knowledge involving poisons, remedies, and protective rituals associated with dangerous deities like Serket and Sekhmet. Someone, at some point, didn't want this information to survive. Why would Egyptians erase knowledge in a civilization famous for preserving everything? Some historians believe these acts were political. Healers wielded extraordinary power, and suppressing them meant strengthening the priesthood. But this explanation raises a problem. If the goal was political control, why erase the knowledge entirely instead of rewriting it? Others believe the missing material was dangerous. Formulas, mixtures, or rituals that later Egyptians considered too risky to preserve. This theory fits the evidence more closely, but still doesn't explain the scale of the erasure. Because the pattern isn't random. The majority of these removals cluster around two periods of crisis: the collapse of the Old Kingdom and the instability of the late New Kingdom. Both eras were marked by famine, political fragmentation, and internal power struggles. And both are known for sudden priestly intervention in cultural and religious matters. Something in those eras terrified the scribes enough that they erased entire categories of knowledge across the country. And then came the most disturbing discovery of all. During a restoration in Thebes, conservators cleaning a soot-covered wall uncovered a line that had been hidden for centuries. Hide the words that open the gate. Let only the sand remember. Those who follow must forget. This wasn't myth or poetry. It was instruction, a directive to bury knowledge deliberately. And Egypt obeyed. Across the land, inscriptions were cut away, names vanished, rituals were left incomplete, manuals were destroyed. What survived was fragmented, enough to suggest that something important once existed there, but not enough to understand it fully. When Champollion revived the language after 3,000 years, the first thing scholars noticed was not what the inscription said, but what had been removed. The silence was intentional, which brings us to the central question: what did ancient Egyptians know that later Egyptians were terrified to preserve? A ritual they feared? A medical technique that held too much power? A technology they no longer understood? A method of protection against something they believed existed beneath the earth? Whatever it wasn't meant for us. But history rarely stays buried. The same erased symbols that appear in lost medical texts also show up in other strange places. On the granite boxes of the Serapeum, in priestly manuals at Abydos, in papyri from Saqqara, and on broken fragments near the Valley of the Kings. These traces hint at a hidden network of knowledge, a system connecting healers, priests, engineers, and ritual specialists across multiple dynasties. Someone tried to erase it, but not completely. Enough remained to reveal the outlines of something larger. And to understand where this trail leads, we must turn to a burial that breaks every rule of Egyptian royal tradition, a tomb that shouldn't exist, yet contains clues linking directly to this lost system of knowledge. When Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, he expected the burial of a king, grand, deliberate, and unmistakably royal. Instead, he stepped into something that has puzzled archaeologists for more than a century: a royal tomb that behaves nothing like a royal tomb. From the very first glance, nothing about Tutankhamun's resting place felt right. The chambers were small, cramped, and asymmetrical, completely unlike the monumental tombs prepared for pharaohs years, sometimes decades, before their deaths. Royal burials were architectural statements: wide corridors, large halls, careful orientations. But Tutankhamun's tomb looked rushed, improvised, and oddly unfitting for a king of Egypt. Its size alone raised eyebrows. It resembled the tomb of a noblewoman rather than a pharaoh. The proportions, the layout, even the orientation followed patterns associated with queens, not kings. The burial chamber turns right instead of left, a detail trivial to modern eyes, but symbolically huge in Egyptian funerary architecture. This single detail has led many researchers to argue that Tutankhamun was placed in a tomb originally built for someone else, possibly Queen Nefertiti. If that is true, then the questions multiply. Why was the boy king buried in a tomb that clearly wasn't his? Where was the original intended burial for the queen? And what forced Egypt to abandon the normal royal funerary protocol? The more archaeologists studied the site, the stranger it became. When conservators examined the wall paintings, they found microbes embedded in the pigment, microbes that can only form when paint is sealed before it fully dries. That means the tomb was closed while the artwork was still wet. No royal burial in Egypt's history had ever been carried out with such haste. Everything about the burial screamed urgency. It was as if Egypt had run out of time. Artifacts inside the tomb deepened the mystery. Tutankhamun's golden mask, the most iconic artifact of ancient Egypt, does not fully match his facial proportions. Some of his jewellery shows signs of having names recarved. His coffins appear to have been repurposed from earlier burials. Even the canopic shrine, a sacred object prepared specifically for each pharaoh, carries inscriptions that seem added at the last moment. Reused burial goods, mismatched craftsmanship, alterations made in a hurry, none of this fits the expected burial of a king. These are signs of improvisation, of a burial assembled from available materials rather than items created specifically for royal use. Egypt had the resources to prepare immaculate tombs, yet for this pharaoh they didn't or couldn't. Why? Some historians believe the answer lies in politics. Tutankhamun reversed the radical religious reforms of his predecessor Akhenaten, who attempted to replace Egypt's many gods with the worship of a single deity, Aten. After Tutankhamun's death, priestly factions sought to erase Akhenaten from history. In the process, Tutankhamun, who undid that revolution, should have been restored in glory. But that's not what happened. His name appears rarely. His monuments were destroyed. His legacy minimized. Some scholars suspect that the elderly court official who became pharaoh after Tutankhamun, may have taken advantage of the situation. I's tomb contains artwork nearly identical to Tutankhamun's, but more elaborate, suggesting that the burial resources intended for Tut may have been redirected to I himself. If this theory is true, then Tutankhamun was pushed aside not only in life, but even in death. And then comes the possibility that haunts researchers to this day. The walls of Tutankhamun's tomb may not be the end of the story. They may be hiding something. In 2015, radar scans detected unusual anomalies behind the north and west walls of the burial chamber. Some scans suggested straight edges and voids, the signature of sealed, undiscovered rooms. Other scans questioned these results. The debate continues, but the architectural logic remains. Tutankhamun's tomb looks like an antechamber, a front room leading into something larger. If a hidden chamber truly exists, many believe it could hold the long-lost burial of Nefertiti, one of the most powerful and enigmatic queens of ancient Egypt. Her disappearance from the archaeological record is one of history's great mysteries. A hidden room behind Tut's tomb could explain the mismatched artifacts, the strange orientation, and the hurried burial. Yet Egyptian authorities have resisted any invasive exploration. Whatever lies behind the walls remains sealed. When all the anomalies are combined, the size of the tomb, the rushed artwork, the reused artifacts, the mismatched design, the political tension, it becomes impossible to ignore a troubling conclusion. Tutankhamun's tomb does not behave like a deliberate royal resting place. It behaves like something assembled in crisis, a placeholder, a backup plan, a burial forced by circumstances Egypt chose not to record. The real mystery may not be the boy king's death at all, but what was happening around him. Something disrupted the royal burial system. Something forced Egypt's most sacred traditions to break. Something made the greatest civilization of the ancient world place a pharaoh in a tomb not meant for him. That something echoes the same signs we've already seen: missing inscriptions, erased medical texts, vanished individuals, disrupted burials, suppressed knowledge. Tutankhamun's tomb is not just an archaeological discovery, it is the one mistake Egypt failed to hide. A crack in the surface of an elaborate system designed to bury secrets beneath sand and stone. And as strange as this tomb is, the enigmas surrounding it are only the beginning. Because deeper in the desert lies a pharaoh whose disappearance and damaged burial may reveal even more about the silent crisis that shaped Egypt's past. Among the more than 5,000 objects recovered from Tutankhamun's tomb, one artifact eclipses all others: the golden funerary mask. It is the symbol of ancient Egypt, flawless, iconic, unforgettable. And yet, despite its fame, scholars quietly avoided one troubling question for decades. The mask may not have been made for Tutankhamun. For a long time, this idea was dismissed as fringe speculation, but as technology improved and conservators took a closer look, the evidence that emerged began pointing toward a far stranger truth. The first hint was easy to overlook: the mask has pierced ears. Adult male pharaohs were not depicted wearing earrings. Pierced ears were typically reserved for queens or young children, not for a king who died at 19. If this mask had been crafted specifically for Tutankhamun, the earrings wouldn't be there. This single detail raised suspicion, but what researchers found next made it impossible to ignore. Modern imaging and forensic reconstructions of Tutankhamun's skull revealed something unexpected. The mask's facial proportions, the jawline, the cheeks, even the eyes, do not match the boy king's actual structure. Yet they align far more closely with depictions of another royal figure: Nefertiti, a queen of extraordinary political power, a woman who may have ruled as pharaoh, and a figure whose tomb and mummy have never been found. The idea that Tutankhamun was buried wearing Nefertiti's funerary mask once seemed unthinkable. Then the material evidence emerged, quietly, piece by piece. One of the most revealing clues came from the gold itself. The mask is not made from a single type of gold, as one would expect for a royal commission. The face is crafted from a purer, reddish-toned gold. The rest of the mask uses a different alloy with a yellow hue. These two types of gold were sourced differently, worked differently, and based on tool traces made at different times. A single object for a single burial should not look like this, but a modified mask, a mask repurposed from an earlier royal burial, would. The face appears older than the rest, older than Tutankhamun, possibly older than his entire dynasty. The breakthrough came in 2015, when conservators studying the mask after a restoration incident performed X-ray scans on the back. Beneath Tutankhamun's cartouche, they found the ghosts of an older inscription. a name that had been carefully scratched out and replaced. The original name was feminine, and the titulary style matched the royal titles Nefertiti used during the later years of Akhenaten's reign, when she may have been acting as co-regent or ruling in her own right. This meant the mask was not simply a queen's ornament, it was the funerary mask of a woman who held pharaonic power, the rarest status a woman could achieve in Egypt. The face, with its delicate contours and elongated eyes, was likely crafted to represent her. Tutankhamun's name was added later. Even the famous plaited beard tells the same story. Its attachment points do not fit the curvature of the chin. The welding does not match the face. The beard itself is masculine, contradicting the feminine origins of the mask. All evidence indicates it was added hastily, a last-minute effort to make a queen's artifact look suitable for a king. These clues fit seamlessly with the rushed nature of Tutankhamun's burial described earlier. A sudden death, limited time, a tomb not built for him, and a team forced to assemble a royal burial using whatever high-status objects were available. Historical context strengthens this interpretation. Egyptian tradition allowed only 70 days to bury a pharaoh, the length of the mummification process. Tutankhamun died unexpectedly. Workshops did not have time to commission a new mask, especially one of such complexity. If Nefertiti's burial equipment had been prepared in advance, and if political chaos followed her disappearance, then her unused funerary mask would have been the only object ready for immediate use. This explains everything: the mismatched materials, the incorrect facial features, the feminine aesthetics beneath the masculine additions, and the altered inscriptions. But it also leads to a far deeper mystery. If Tutankhamun used Nefertiti's mask, then where is Nefertiti's real burial? Where is her mask? Where is her body? The disappearance of both mirrors a broader pattern seen across Egyptian history. The intentional removal of names, objects, and people whose existence complicated political narratives. Nefertiti's erasure aligns eerily well with the erased medical texts, the missing individuals, and the disrupted burials from the same era. There are several possibilities. Her burial may lie hidden behind Tutankhamun's walls. She may have been interred elsewhere in a tomb not yet discovered. Her body and burial goods may have been dismantled after her fall from favor, or her death and burial may have been deliberately concealed. None of these scenarios are comforting. All of them indicate a sudden collapse in royal succession and a scramble to regain control. When all the evidence is combined, the conclusion is difficult to avoid. Tutankhamun's iconic golden mask was not created for him. It was a recycled relic of another ruler, almost certainly Nefertiti. This raises a much larger question. What was happening inside Egypt at the end of the Amarna period that forced the kingdom to reuse one of the most sacred objects ever created? What crisis was so urgent that it reshaped burial traditions, erased inscriptions, silenced medical knowledge, and reshuffled royal identities? The mask is not just an artifact, it is a symptom, a clue pointing to a moment of chaos that Egypt did not want preserved, a moment that keeps resurfacing in erased lines, altered artifacts, missing burials, and unexplained gaps in the historical record. And this pattern only deepens when we examine the deaths associated with Tutankhamun's discovery. A series of events that made the world believe an ancient curse had awakened beneath the desert sands. When Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922, the world reacted with fascination, disbelief, and then fear. Newspapers printed dramatic headlines about a pharaoh's curse, claiming that anyone who disturbed the boy king's burial would face deadly consequences. Scholars dismissed all of it as superstition. But within months, the pattern of strange illnesses, sudden deaths, and unexplained incidents surrounding the excavation became impossible to ignore. And the more closely you examine the events, the harder it becomes to explain them away with simple coincidences. The first shock came from Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy patron who funded Howard Carter's excavation. Only a few months after they unlocked the burial chamber, Carnarvon died unexpectedly in Cairo. Officially, the cause was a mosquito bite that became infected, but the progression of the illness didn't make sense. The infection spread with unnatural speed. His fever escalated within hours. His health collapsed so rapidly that doctors couldn't stabilize him. And at the exact moment he died, witnesses reported that the lights in Cairo flickered and went out. One death can be dismissed, but it didn't end there. Over the next 10 years, 6 more individuals connected directly to the opening of the tomb died prematurely. The causes varied: respiratory failure, sudden fevers, strokes, heart complications, blood poisoning, infections with no identifiable source. These people lived in different countries, had no shared environment, and no medical history in common. Yet the pattern repeated: sudden onset, rapid decline, no clear explanation. Skeptics argued that people die all the time, but statistically the percentage was far too high to wave away casually. Even doctors at the time admitted privately that the clustering of mysterious deaths was unusual. As modern science advanced, a new layer of explanation emerged, one that Carter and his team could not have known. Several tombs in the Valley of the Kings, including Tutankhamun's, contain elevated levels of radon gas, toxic molds, and fungal spores capable of causing serious respiratory damage. Some fungal toxins found in sealed chambers can trigger symptoms similar to sepsis. Others can lead to organ failure in individuals with compromised immune systems. Yet this raised a question that science alone couldn't answer. If these toxins were responsible, why did they affect some people but not others? Why did one member of the team fall ill immediately while another walked in and out of the tomb for weeks with no issues at all? The ancient Egyptians seemed aware of something. Tomb inscriptions across the country include warnings, not always as direct text, but encoded in symbolic scenes, implying that death would come swiftly to those who disturbed the dead. Tutankhamun's own burial equipment contains protective spells calling on deities associated with vengeance, poison, and retribution. And strangely, the symptoms recorded in some of the modern deaths resemble the same dangers invoked in those rituals: venom-like reactions, respiratory collapse, sudden infections. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the pattern didn't stop. Arthur Mace, a key member of Carter's team, developed severe respiratory problems and died unexpectedly. Doctors struggled to identify whether the cause was poisoning, pneumonia, or an unusual infection. Today, some medical researchers believe his symptoms match exposure to Aspergillus flavus, a deadly fungus found in several sealed Egyptian tombs. Once inhaled, it can cause fatal organ failure, especially in individuals weakened by stress or fatigue. Still, not everyone exposed to the fungus died. Again, only certain people suffered. Meanwhile, Howard Carter, who spent more time inside the tomb than anyone else, lived for 17 more years. His survival is often presented as the ultimate evidence against a curse. But Carter himself was never fully transparent. He became more reclusive in his later years, refused medical examinations, and protected certain details about the tomb with unusual secrecy. After his death, small objects from Tutankhamun's burial, items that should never have left Egypt, were discovered among his personal belongings. Some believe Carter survived because he entered the tomb gradually, allowing his body to adapt to the toxins. Others believe he didn't trigger whatever symbolic protection the burial rituals were meant to activate. Carter always insisted there was no curse, but he also forbade unnecessary visitors from entering the tomb, even after the excavation was complete. One of the strangest events occurred far from Egypt. On the night of Carnarvon's death, his dog in England reportedly howled, collapsed, and died instantly. Different continent, different environment, the same moment, scientifically impossible to verify, yet difficult to dismiss entirely. And this pattern of strange reactions wasn't limited to Tutankhamun's tomb. In Saqqara, Luxor and Giza, archaeologists working in sealed chambers reported sudden nausea, fevers, hallucinations, breathing difficulties, disorientation, and mysterious infections. Many of these symptoms match exposure to toxic mold, ancient pathogens, or dangerous chemicals used in embalming. Yet some tombs also contain inscriptions warning of maladies no doctor can heal, or spirits of the West forbidden to the living. Egyptians had no concept of radiation or microbial toxins, but somehow they carved warnings that accurately describe hazardous environments thousands of years before modern science. How? Science can explain the presence of radon, mold, low oxygen, or embalming chemicals, but science cannot explain the timing of the deaths, the selectivity of the victims, the strange synchronistic events, or the uncanny alignment between ancient warnings and modern consequences. It is possible that the Egyptians understood the dangers of sealed spaces in ways we don't fully appreciate, combining environmental awareness with symbolism and ritual to create a form of protection far more sophisticated than superstition. Warnings we ignored. Warnings Carter's team triggered. Warnings built into a burial that may have been designed to protect something far more important than one young king. Because Tutankhamun wasn't the only one the tomb was built to defend, the patterns point towards something else, something linked to the missing inscriptions, the altered mask, the erased rituals, and a crisis Egypt refused to record. The deaths were never the secret, they were the symptom. The real secret is what the tomb was guarding, and to understand that, we must turn to a ruler even more mysterious, one whose body disappeared entirely, leaving behind one of the most damaged and enigmatic burial complexes in Egypt's history. Among the powerful rulers of Egypt's 18th dynasty, one king nearly vanished from the historical record. His name was Thutmose II, a pharaoh whose reign left so little behind that for decades, archaeologists could barely confirm where he was buried, what he built, or how firmly he ever held the throne. He ruled only a short time. He commissioned almost no monumental works. His inscriptions are scarce, scattered, and incomplete, and his memory was overshadowed by giants. His father, Thutmose I, a warrior king, his wife Hatshepsut, who became pharaoh in her own right, and his son Thutmose III, the empire builder known as the Napoleon of Egypt. For a long time, archaeologists believed Thutmose II's burial had been completely lost to time. Then in 2022, everything changed. An Egyptian-British team working deep in the Theban mountain uncovered a descending passage hidden beneath rubble and sediment. At first, they assumed it belonged to a royal woman. Its location matched the cemetery where wives of Thutmose III were buried, and it sat close to Hatshepsut's early tomb. But as the team pushed deeper, the tomb began to defy expectations. The slope of the corridor was unusually steep. The plaster on the walls carried scars of violent water damage. The entrance had been sealed not with ritual stonework, but with debris, a sign of emergency, not ceremony. Many chambers had collapsed or were filled with thick layers of ancient mud. This wasn't a tomb carefully prepared for eternity. It was a tomb struck by disaster. Through a gap barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, archaeologists reached the burial chamber. What they found inside forced them to rethink everything they knew about Thutmose II. The chamber was empty. No coffin, no sarcophagus fragments, no burial objects, not even broken pottery. A king's tomb should be filled with ritual items, jars, linens, amulets, funerary texts. Even robbed tombs contain debris, smashed artifacts, damaged walls, fragments left behind. But here, nothing. The removal was deliberate, careful, and complete. Someone entered the tomb long after the burial, not to steal treasure, but to remove the pharaoh himself. The question is, why? Layers of sediment inside the corridors provided one clue. The tomb had been built directly beneath a natural waterfall. Shortly after the burial, a catastrophic flood tore through the chambers, destroying walls, destabilizing ceilings, and threatening to ruin the mummy. Priests were forced to carve a second tunnel to access the body safely. Once they recovered the remains, they transferred them elsewhere, likely to protect them from further collapse. And indeed, the mummy of Thutmose II was eventually found in the 19th century, hidden far away in the royal cache of Deir el-Bahari, buried centuries after his original tomb had been compromised. This explains why the tomb was empty, but it does not explain why it was built in such a vulnerable location, nor why the burial fragments inside it tell a far stranger story. Despite the flood damage, archaeologists recovered traces of painted blue stars from the ceiling, typical of high royal burials. They found yellow celestial symbols, fragments of the Book of the Amduat, and pieces of ritual statues. These are the decorations of a pharaoh, not a minor figure. So why does a tomb with such prestigious artwork look like it was abandoned in panic? Floodwater can collapse a chamber, but it cannot reorganize a tomb. It doesn't remove coffins, amulets, or jars. People do. Someone, sometime after the burial, entered the tomb and cleared it methodically. Their motive remains unknown. And just as unsettling, some symbols in the tomb appear scraped away or damaged intentionally, similar to the erased inscriptions in the tomb of Teti Nebfu and the fragmented medical texts from Saqqara. It suggests a coordinated pattern of removal, not random disaster. Thutmose II also lived in a politically volatile moment. His reign was wedged between powerful and competing factions, supporters of Hatshepsut, supporters of Thutmose III, and conservative elements who rejected the idea of a female pharaoh altogether. Any burial associated with him could have become a political pawn. Perhaps his remains were moved to protect them. Perhaps they were erased to weaken a claim to power. But political struggle alone cannot explain the symbols scratched away, the missing lines in funerary texts, or the connections to ritual erasure patterns seen elsewhere in the 18th dynasty. Archaeology suggests something deeper, something involving knowledge or a crisis that threatened the priesthood's control. Even the architecture adds to the mystery. The design of Thutmose II's tomb does not match typical early 18th dynasty structures. Its features resemble later, more secretive royal burials, almost as if the tomb was rebuilt, repurposed, or modified after the flood, or after something else that remains invisible to the historical record. Some Egyptologists now believe the tomb may have been constructed, abandoned, reused, altered, and evacuated, all within a short window of time. A sequence of events that has no precedent in Egypt's normally well-planned royal mortuary system. Egypt did not improvise burials, not unless something went catastrophically wrong. Thutmose II's disrupted tomb, erased inscriptions, missing burial goods, and relocation align perfectly with the same pattern seen in other unexplained cases. The missing physician, the censored medical texts, and the anomalies surrounding Tutankhamun's burial. Each instance shows signs of disruption, intervention, and controlled erasure. These are not isolated events. They are connected, and whatever caused this pattern seems to echo across centuries, appearing whenever forbidden knowledge, ritual danger, or political instability threatened the order of the new kingdom. If Thutmose II's burial was stripped, altered, or hidden, then the next question is obvious. What was happening during this period that Egypt did not want remembered? The answer may lie not in a royal tomb at all, but in a place far stranger. A vast underground necropolis filled with colossal granite sarcophagi carved with a level of precision that modern engineers still struggle to explain. To understand the next step in this mystery, we must descend into the Serapeum of Saqqara. Beneath the sands of Saqqara lies one of the strangest archaeological sites in all of Egypt. It isn't a pyramid, it isn't a royal tomb, and it doesn't resemble any traditional burial ground known from Egyptian history. It is a long, silent labyrinth carved deep underground, a place holding 24 colossal granite sarcophagi, each one so massive and so precisely engineered that modern specialists still struggle to understand how they were created. This is the Serapeum of Saqqara, and almost nothing about it fits the story Egyptologists have been telling for more than a century. According to the conventional explanation, these enormous boxes were meant to hold the mummified remains of Apis bulls, sacred animals worshipped as living manifestations of the god Ptah. But here is the first problem. The boxes are far too large. An Apis bull weighs around 1 to 1.5 tons. The granite sarcophagi weigh 70 to 100 tons, with lids alone reaching 30 tons. The interiors are large enough to hold several bulls at once, yet not a single complete bull mummy has ever been found inside. Only occasional fragments, bones, scraps, pieces, nothing that justifies the scale or precision of the boxes themselves. If they were simply animal coffins, why carve them with such engineering mastery? The precision of the work astonishes modern engineers. Each box was carved from a single piece of granite or diorite, stones harder than iron. Yet the walls are polished to near-mirror smoothness. The internal angles form perfect right corners. The lids fit so tightly they create almost airtight seals. And the markings on the stone are inconsistent with the copper tools typically assigned to ancient Egyptian craftsmen. To achieve workmanship like this today, we would use diamond saws, laser alignment systems, and industrial milling machines. But the builders of the Serapeum left no tools, no workshops, and no explanation. Egyptologists say the answer is skill and time. Engineers say the answer does not match the evidence. And then there's the physical space. The tunnels are barely wider than the sarcophagi themselves, carved deep beneath the desert with narrow turns and sloping passages. If teams of workers pulled the boxes with ropes, as traditional theories propose, they would have had nowhere to stand, nowhere to maneuver, and no mechanical systems to assist them. No ramps, no scaffolding, no lifting platforms have been found. The logistics are impossible to reconcile with the conventional narrative. Inside the chambers, archaeologists found traces of the technique used to position the sarcophagi. The rooms were once filled with sand. The granite boxes were slid across it, then lowered into place as the sand was slowly removed. This clever method explains the final positioning, but it does nothing to explain how the boxes were transported into the tunnel system in the first place. To complicate things further, excavators discovered ancient wooden winches lying near some of the chambers. These devices, far too small to move objects even a fraction of the sarcophagi's weight, seem symbolic rather than functional, as if placed there for ritual purposes, not engineering. This raises the possibility that the Egyptians knew how to position the boxes, but whatever method they used to transport them has vanished from the historical record entirely. Some researchers propose a different approach altogether, one rooted in material science. Granite contains quartz, a mineral capable of generating electrical charge when subjected to pressure, vibration, or heat. Inside sealed spaces with gases building up or temperature shifting, these boxes could theoretically produce electromagnetic or acoustic effects. A few lids were found slightly displaced, as though internal pressure had forced them upward. Not broken, just shifted. It raises the unsettling question: were these boxes ever meant to hold bulls at all? Or were they designed to contain something else? Something that generated pressure, gas, or heat? Something the priests wanted sealed within the granite itself? Chemical tests deepen the mystery. Residues inside certain sarcophagi do not match materials used in bull mummification. Instead, they include unusual resins, unidentified organic compounds, and faint traces of what may be fermentation byproducts, substances that create gas expansion and thermal reactions over time. The exact conditions that could enhance the quartz-rich granite's energy properties. If these boxes were not coffins, could they have been part of some ritual, experimental, or technological process? Egyptology does not have an answer. What is known is that the Serapeum did not operate during a single period. It was expanded multiple times during the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and even the Ptolemaic era. Each expansion extended the tunnels deeper underground, and each new section shows signs of secrecy: sealed entrances, blocked passageways, hidden alcoves, and an eerie absence of inscriptions. Egyptian tombs were typically covered in texts and imagery, but the Serapeum is almost completely silent. That silence speaks loudly. It suggests the site was not intended for public access. Its function was controlled, restricted, and possibly hidden from all but a select group of priests. A burial ground for bulls does not require such secrecy, but something else might. When you stitch the clues together, the oversized boxes, the impossible precision, the lack of complete burials, the chemical residues, the near-total silence of inscriptions, the repeated sealing and expansion, one conclusion becomes difficult to avoid. The Serapeum was never a simple storage place for sacred animals, and the more you compare its anomalies with patterns seen elsewhere in Egypt, the erased inscriptions, the missing physician, the recycled funerary objects, the rushed burials, the more the Serapeum fits into a larger network of secrecy and suppressed knowledge. This underground complex is not an isolated mystery. It is part of a system designed to hide, restrict, or contain information that Egypt did not want widely known. And as strange as the Serapeum is, the next mystery reaches even deeper into the ancient world. Because modern technology has begun to reveal secrets locked within the mummies themselves, discoveries showing that the Egyptians understood the human body in ways no one expected. To follow the trail, we must look directly into the bodies of the dead. For thousands of years, Egyptian mummies lay in silence, their stories locked beneath layers of linen and resin. But today, with modern CT scanning, the dead are speaking again. And what they reveal is rewriting everything we thought we understood about ancient Egypt. Because the more scientists examine these bodies, the stranger the evidence becomes. Some mummies show signs of medical techniques far more advanced than their era should allow. Some bear surgical traces that seem impossible for the Bronze Age. Others contain objects hidden inside their bodies, items no written document ever mentioned. And many display practices so unusual that Egyptologists still struggle to categorize them. These discoveries echo the same pattern we've seen before: erased rituals, missing burials, unexplained technology, and knowledge that someone in Egypt clearly did not want preserved. One of the most striking examples comes from a mummy known as Lady Sheneta, preserved at the Field Museum. When researchers scanned her with high-resolution CT imagery, they discovered that her body had been reconstructed from within. Artificial eyes had been placed in her sockets. Linen had been packed into her throat to prevent collapse. Her spine had been reinforced, and her facial structure had been reshaped under the wrappings. These weren't cosmetic touches, they were structural engineering. Someone rebuilt her body with an understanding of anatomy far deeper than simple mummification would require. This wasn't routine embalming. This was restoration, preservation, and reconstruction combined. And Lady Sheneta was not an isolated case. Other scans reveal surgical procedures that simply should not exist at this point in history. One skull shows cut marks around a brain tumour, suggesting that ancient physicians inspected or attempted to treat it. Some mummies have healed fractures set with a precision comparable to modern orthopedic methods. Bone-aligned car nebu-eli, then reinforced with resin-based splints. There are even hints of early dental interventions, metal wires anchoring loose teeth, gold ligatures reinforcing damaged molars. These discoveries are not accidents, they show intent and expertise. The Egyptians weren't just preserving the dead, they were experimenting on the body itself. This immediately brings us back to a troubling question. How much medical knowledge did Egypt possess that never survived in writing? Some of the most puzzling findings involve objects placed inside the mummies, in locations no funerary text ever describes. Scans reveal amulets hidden behind organs rather than around them, wooden shapes inserted into cavities, channels in the limbs filled with resin, even materials inside skulls that do not match anything known from Egyptian embalming practices. One mummy contained a thin metal blade laid alongside the spine, made from a metal not native to Egypt. Another held a ceramic piece embedded deep in the throat, perhaps to stabilize the airway for the afterlife. None of these procedures appear in the medical papyri that have survived, which means either the knowledge was transmitted orally or it was deliberately removed from the written record. Both possibilities fit the pattern we've seen in other parts of Egyptian history. Many mummies also show signs of what can only be described as experimentation. Incomplete embalming processes, selective resin application, anatomical adjustments performed only on certain limbs, incisions made at unusual angles. These are not mistakes, they are tests, variations, attempts to refine or explore techniques, and the timing is no coincidence. The period in which these experimental mummies appear overlaps with several historical disruptions. The era of Thutmose II, the political chaos around Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, the missing physician Teti-Neb-Fu, and widespread erasures of ritual and medical texts. Different mysteries, yes, but the same time frame. Chemical analysis of embalming substances adds another layer. Some resins carried antifungal and antibacterial properties more effective than certain modern preservatives. Others came from regions thousands of miles away, implying trade networks or ritual sourcing far beyond normal expectations. More surprising still, a compound found in several mummies resembles modern synthetic adhesives, requiring complex heating and extraction techniques. Egypt wasn't just using natural resins. In some cases, they were engineering them, yet no surviving text explains how. Once again, the knowledge appears to have been restricted, hidden, or removed entirely. CT scans have also uncovered medical conditions never expected in the ancient world. Arteriosclerosis, calcification, genetic disorders, bone density anomalies, even signs of poisoning. Some mummies show traces of chronic exposure to toxic substances, consistent with ritual practices, medical experimentation, or political intrigue. Other individuals suffered injuries that required sophisticated care, a reconstructed jaw, multiple stabilized fractures, and skull trauma that had healed long before death. These are not simple embalming procedures. They represent advanced medical intervention. All of this leads to an unsettling conclusion. Egypt possessed a deep understanding of the human body, far deeper than the surviving texts suggest. And when you combine the physical evidence with the missing inscriptions, the censored medical manuals, the rushed royal burials, the altered artifacts, and the mysterious granite structures of the Serapeum, another pattern emerges. Egypt went through repeated periods of knowledge suppression. Something in the past required secrecy, something required control, something they believed should not be written down. The mummies are telling us that the suppressed knowledge involved medicine, anatomy, preservation, toxins, and perhaps something beyond any of these categories, something we still lack the vocabulary to describe. And they are only the beginning, because if individual bodies hold secrets this powerful, then what about the burial grounds designed to hold the masses? What about the places where Egypt dealt not with dozens of deaths, but with thousands, or even millions? To follow the trail further, we must look at a cemetery unlike anything else in the ancient world. A vast burial field that may contain more than 1 million mummies. When people imagine ancient Egypt, they picture great pyramids rising from the desert and the burials of kings wrapped in gold. But as archaeologists dig deeper, a very different Egypt begins to emerge, one filled with structures that vanished, tombs that were dismantled, and cemeteries whose sheer scale makes no sense in the traditional story of Egyptian civilization. This part of Egypt's history rarely appears in textbooks, yet it mirrors the same patterns we've seen throughout this investigation: disappearing bodies, altered burials, erased inscriptions, and the quiet manipulation of historical memory. And it begins with a pyramid that was supposed to be impossible to lose. In 2008, a team working at Saqqara rediscovered something extraordinary: the foundation of a pyramid swallowed completely by the desert. For nearly 4,000 years, no one even knew it existed. It had originally been discovered in the 1800s, then promptly buried again by shifting sands. Only its lower structure survives today, earning it the name the Headless Pyramid. What shocked researchers wasn't its rediscovery, but the condition it was found in. The pyramid had been dismantled in antiquity, not eroded, not robbed casually, but taken apart stone by stone. Its casing blocks were removed. Its capstone vanished. The surrounding chambers were stripped clean. Inscriptions were smashed or erased. Burial goods were missing entirely. Why would Egyptians dismantle one of their own pyramids? A pyramid wasn't just a tomb. It was a political statement, a divine machine, a ruler's eternal identity carved into the landscape. Taking it apart made no sense unless someone wanted the pharaoh who built it to disappear from history. And the timing matters. The destruction appears to have occurred during a period of political instability, the same type of instability linked to altered burials and erased knowledge in earlier chapters. This is not an isolated anomaly. It's part of a pattern. At the same time, pyramids were vanishing. Strange discoveries were emerging elsewhere. In the Valley of the Monkeys near Luxor, archaeologists uncovered dozens of deliberately mummified baboons. Their condition was disturbing: severe vitamin D deficiency, bone deformities, and underdeveloped musculature. Signs that they had been kept indoors for years with almost no sunlight before being sacrificed. Baboons were sacred to Thoth, the god of knowledge, writing, and hidden wisdom. Why were these sacred animals confined unnaturally long, then killed and embalmed? Why does this practice appear in the same eras when Egypt was erasing inscriptions and suppressing knowledge? The pattern continues. Another discovery. Baffling researchers came from burials containing golden tongues, thin gold plates placed inside the mouths of the dead. Only a handful of mummies received this treatment, yet all appear during turbulent eras when priestly factions were fighting for control over ritual knowledge. These golden tongues may have symbolized protection, purification, or the ability to speak in the afterlife. But their appearance is so rare and so context-specific that they suggest something other than ordinary ritual tradition. The more Egypt tried to hide knowledge, the more unusual its funerary practices became. But nothing compares to what archaeologists uncovered in 1996 in the Fag el-Gamus burial ground, a site that may contain one of the largest concentrations of mummified bodies in the world. A cemetery holding hundreds of thousands, possibly up to 1 million mummies. The strange part? Almost none belonged to royalty, nobility, or priests. These were ordinary people, men, women, children, wrapped in simple linen, placed in shallow graves, and mummified through methods that defy conventional understanding. Traditional Egyptian mummification was expensive, a privilege of the elite. But here, something completely different occurred. Many bodies were preserved through natural desert dehydration. Others show crude embalming attempts, inconsistent resin use, incision sites that don't match formal techniques, partial organ removal, or simple drying without any ritual preparation. It wasn't standardized. It wasn't elite. It wasn't recorded. It was mass processing. Why would ordinary Egyptians be mummified in such vast numbers? One theory suggests a social movement promoting affordable afterlife preparation. Another, more unsettling possibility: a large-scale event forced mass burials. A famine, epidemic, or political catastrophe Egypt never documented. The dates of the cemetery align with periods of instability, foreign influence, and internal decline, eras where Egyptian texts grow suspiciously quiet. Again, the same silence appears. The cemetery also contains details that do not fit any known funerary tradition. Infants were buried with unusual amulets. Some adults were wrapped in woven animal skins. Others had their ankles bound or limbs elongated unnaturally. CT scans revealed skulls packed with unknown substances, and a few individuals, although never embalmed, were buried in positions normally reserved for the elite. These clues suggest two possibilities. Some bodies were never meant to be mummified at all, and others were preserved according to rituals that existed outside the formal priesthood, rituals that operated in parallel, in the shadows. The most troubling part? There are almost no written records describing the cemetery, no inscriptions explaining its purpose, no administrative texts referencing its scale, no funerary manuals linking it to known rituals. For the largest burial project in Egyptian history, the silence is overwhelming. Why would Egypt hide, or fail to record, a cemetery containing up to 1 million bodies? A devastating epidemic? A political purge? A mass sacrifice? A religious movement the priesthood wanted erased? No explanation fully fits, but the pattern matches everything else we've seen. Pyramids dismantled, tombs emptied, rituals altered, inscriptions removed, medical knowledge suppressed, and now entire populations buried anonymously. Egypt wasn't simply losing information, it was removing information, systematically, strategically, across centuries. And what came next, the strange rituals involving hybrid gods, animal mummies, and forbidden knowledge, would push the mystery even further. To understand it, we must look at the burial practices that defy every rule of Egyptian religion, and the rituals Egypt tried hardest to hide. Egypt is known for its pharaohs, pyramids, and monumental tombs, but beneath those familiar icons lies another Egypt, a stranger one. An Egypt filled with ritual animals, hybrid deities, and funerary practices that do not fit into any traditional understanding of Egyptian religion. Some of these creatures were honored as sacred, some were feared, some were preserved using methods that defy logic, and the moments when these unusual rituals appear are not random. They coincide with the same turbulent historical windows we've already explored, the periods marked by lost burials, erased inscriptions, experimental mummification, and unexplained engineering. The more you trace these clues across time, the clearer the pattern becomes. Egypt used ritual animals during moments of crisis, instability, or suppressed knowledge. One of the most striking examples is the appearance of the golden-tongued dead. In recent years, archaeologists uncovered mummies with thin gold plates inserted into their mouths, a ritual never described in the major funerary texts, never found in royal burials, and never mentioned in the priestly manuals that survive. Yet these gold tongues appear in multiple regions, from Taposiris Magna to Oxyrhynchus, from Alexandria to Saqqara. What's unusual is who received them. Not kings, not high priests, not elites. Many were ordinary villagers, people who would never have had access to specialized rituals. Why were they given a treatment typically reserved for gods? Some scholars believe the gold tongue granted the deceased the ability to speak in the afterlife. Gold was the flesh of the gods, a divine metal. Others propose purification or the replacement of damaged organs. A few suggest the ritual was meant to silence forbidden words or protect the soul from forces never recorded in writing. But the most troubling detail is that these golden tongues only appear during periods of priestly conflict, eras marked by power struggles, knowledge suppression, and religious turbulence. The same pattern appears with another group of ritual animals, mummified baboons. Baboons were sacred to Thoth, the god of writing, calculation, astronomy, and hidden knowledge. In many ways, Thoth was the patron of intellectual control, the divine scribe who maintained cosmic order by deciding what should be remembered and what should be forgotten. When scientists examined the baboon mummies, they discovered unsettling details. Many animals suffered from severe vitamin D deficiency, bone deformities from long periods indoors, stunted growth, and tooth decay consistent with confinement. They had been kept alive unnaturally long in unnatural conditions before being sacrificed and mummified. This wasn't simple ritual veneration, it was controlled captivity. The embalming itself showed experimental traits, strange resins, inconsistent wrapping techniques, and evidence that priests were testing methods rather than following established tradition. These baboon mummies cluster around specific eras: the late Middle Kingdom, the early New Kingdom, and the turmoil that followed Akhenaten's religious revolution. Periods associated with knowledge suppression and political upheaval. The animals of Thoth appear exactly when knowledge was being erased. Another mystery comes from the scarabs, one of Egypt's most iconic symbols associated with Khepri, the god who rolls the sun across the sky. But scarabs appear in contexts that have nothing to do with solar rebirth. Archaeologists have found giant stone scarabs weighing several tons in isolated desert locations, as well as tiny scarabs hidden inside the bodies of mummies, placed in skull cavities, joints, or even sewn between layers of linen. Some scarabs contain inscriptions that mix writing systems. Others were left incomplete, as if the ritual was interrupted, abandoned, or intentionally left unfinished. Scarabs inside the body make sense only if they were meant to seal something, anchor something, or prevent something from moving. Heart scarabs were used to stop the heart from speaking against the deceased during judgment. So what did skull scarabs stop? What force were the priests trying to contain? And why do these strange scarab rituals spike during the same periods marked by erased knowledge, missing bodies, and political chaos? Golden tongues, confined baboons, inserted scarabs. Each one reappears during 3 historical windows: the collapse of the Old Kingdom, the Amarna upheaval, and the turbulent end of the New Kingdom. These are the same periods tied to erased medical texts, repurposed royal artifacts, disrupted burials, mass mummification sites, and the precision-engineered granite boxes of the Serapeum. In every era where knowledge was controlled or erased, strange ritual animals appear. This is not coincidence, it's a response. Egypt seems to have turned to ritual creatures when confronting threats it could not explain or could not record. Threats involving disease, spiritual disruption, political purges, or beliefs too dangerous to preserve in writing. And the pattern raises an even more unsettling possibility. These animals were not merely symbols. They may have been tools, instruments used to seal, contain, or counteract something Egypt struggled to control. But the clearest evidence that Egyptian ritual crossed into the realm of engineering lies not with animals, but with objects. Artifacts that behave less like religious symbols and more like machines. Because in the next chapter, Egypt stops using creatures and starts building devices. Egypt is remembered for its temples and tombs, the stone monuments that survived thousands of years. But hidden among those ruins are objects that don't behave like religious symbols at all. They behave like mechanisms. These artifacts have moving parts, engineered joints, precision angles, and construction methods that don't match the technology Egypt is said to have had. They rarely appear in mainstream history books, yet they reveal something extraordinary. Whenever Egypt faced political turmoil, religious upheaval, or a sudden rupture in its social order, engineered objects began to appear. Not art, not decoration, mechanisms. One of the clearest examples was uncovered in 1954 when archaeologists excavating near the Great Pyramid discovered a sealed pit containing more than 1,200 pieces of ancient cedar wood. When assembled, these fragments formed a 144-foot solar boat, a vessel built without nails, held together instead by an intricate tension rope system and precision joinery. This was the Khufu solar boat, one of the most astonishing pieces of ancient engineering ever found. Each plank interlocked with the next like a high-precision kit. Marine engineers who studied the reconstruction noted that the design mirrors advanced shipbuilding techniques not known anywhere else for thousands of years. The flexibility of the rope-bound joints allowed the massive vessel to move without cracking, a method remarkably similar to Scandinavian ship design, except this predates Scandinavia's earliest examples by 4 millennia. And perhaps the strangest detail, 2 more sealed boat pits remain unopened beside the pyramid. These were not symbolic objects carved in stone. They were functional vessels, built with an understanding of physics far ahead of what historians typically credit to the Old Kingdom. Why bury working ships? Why engineer them so perfectly only to hide them underground? If they were ritual vessels, why make them seaworthy? Questions like these push Egypt closer to the edge of a forgotten technological world. Another strange artifact seemed ordinary until someone X-rayed it. Buried deep within the Metropolitan Museum of Art is a small wooden statue of Hathor, a simple devotional figure at first glance. For decades, no one suspected anything unusual about it, but imaging revealed a mechanical axis running from the shoulder through the torso, connected to the arm. When manipulated, the arm rises and falls. A hidden joint, a movable limb, an internal pivot system. This wasn't accidental damage or loose wood. It was a concealed mechanism, an automaton carved inside a statue. This tiny machine suggests the Egyptians weren't just artisans. They were engineers. Someone designed that motion with intention, perhaps for ritual animation, a ceremonial gesture, or a symbolic blessing that only priests witnessed. Whatever its purpose, it demonstrates mastery of force, movement, precision carving, and mechanical design, all in the Bronze Age. And the pattern continues inside Egypt's tombs. Several royal burials contain evidence of automatic sealing systems, sliding granite blocks, gravity-triggered portcullises, counterweights, and grooves designed to lock chambers permanently once the burial was complete. The Great Pyramid alone features a granite portcullis system of 3 60-ton blocks engineered to drop into place with mathematical precision. These are not symbolic features. They are machines, functioning mechanisms built to seal, secure, and protect. The Tomb of Seti. Contains angled ramps, hidden doors, and multi-stage sealing systems that required exact calculations of weight, friction, and descent rate. This kind of engineering would not be seen again in world architecture until the medieval period, yet Egypt had it more than 1,000 years earlier. And beyond the tombs, Egypt's ritual devices behave less like religious artifacts and more like scientific instruments. Sistrums vibrate at specific resonant frequencies. Water clocks measure time using controlled flow and calibrated markers. Nilometers use hydraulic readings to predict the Nile's flood cycles. Temple alignment tools reflect an understanding of solar and astronomical observation. These instruments require mathematics, material science, and precise measurement, skills that emerge most clearly during periods of political upheaval and religious crisis. So why does Egypt's most advanced technology appear when the rest of the civilization is destabilizing? The pattern is unmistakable. The solar boat emerges near the collapse of the Old Kingdom. The Hathor mechanism appears during Middle Kingdom instability. The portcullis systems and engineered defences rise in the turbulence of the New Kingdom. Water clocks and hydraulic devices flourish during environmental stress. Ritual mechanisms appear after Akhenaten's religious revolution shattered Egypt's spiritual order. Again and again, when Egypt is threatened, its technology spikes. And as soon as stability returns, the technology vanishes, almost as if it were being hidden, restricted, or controlled by a select few. The royal engineers, astronomer priests, and medical specialists who left almost no written records behind. When you assemble the evidence from this chapter with everything we've uncovered before, the erased medical texts, the missing bodies, the reused burial goods, the altered masks, the experimental mummification, the ritual animals, the granite giants of the Serapeum, a single larger question rises to the surface. If Egypt possessed advanced medical, mechanical, and ritual knowledge, and if that knowledge surfaced only during crises, then what exactly were they preparing for? What force, event, or threat was so significant that Egypt's most guarded knowledge appeared only in moments of instability, and then disappeared again, buried beneath the sand? To answer that, we must step back, not into a single artifact or tomb, but into the entire 4,000-year pattern that binds these mysteries together. And that takes us into the final chapter. After tracing every thread of this investigation, from vanished physicians and erased inscriptions, to rushed royal burials, engineered granite boxes, experimental mummification, mass cemeteries, ritual animals, and mechanical artifacts, a single truth emerges with unsettling clarity. Egypt was not just a civilization of monuments. It was a civilization that curated knowledge, managed it, restricted it, and erased it when necessary. Across 4,000 years, every mystery we've examined points toward the same conclusion. Egypt did not simply lose parts of its history, it removed them. Some losses were subtle, some were violent, some were engineered with astonishing precision, but all of them were intentional. Let's step back and look at the pattern as a whole. Throughout Egyptian history, key individuals connected to specialized knowledge vanish without explanation. The royal doctor Teti Neb Fu, a man with rare titles and access to powerful medical rights, was buried inside a finely carved tomb, yet his body is missing. Priests associated with venom rituals disappear. Officials linked to forbidden practices have their names chiseled out, their stories cut away stone by stone. Whenever knowledge became sensitive, dangerous, or politically volatile, the people who carried it were quietly removed from the record. The same surgical erasure appears in the texts. Whole sections of tomb inscriptions, especially those involving medical formulas, toxin rituals, protection spells, or politically charged names, were deliberately carved out. The lines weren't weathered or eroded. They were targeted, clean, precise, as if someone wanted to eliminate entire branches of knowledge from the historical memory. And the timing matches periods of crisis: the collapse of the Old Kingdom, the Amarna Revolution, the decline of the New Kingdom, moments when Egypt's ideological center fractured and when controlling information became essential for survival. Burials tell the same story. Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't built for him. Thutmose II's burial was evacuated. High-status officials were buried in reused coffins or repurposed rooms. Tombs were sealed, altered, or even dismantled entirely, like the headless pyramid, intentionally stripped of its stones, inscriptions, and identity. These disruptions aren't random. They coincide with the same historical windows as the erased texts. Windows marked by instability, priestly conflict, environmental stress, or radical religious reform. and then we encounter the engineering. Whenever Egypt's political structure weakened, its most precise and advanced artifacts appear, as if knowledge previously hidden suddenly surfaced. The perfectly interlocking timbers of Khufu's solar boat, the granite sarcophagi of the Serapeum carved with machining accuracy, hidden mechanical joints in ritual statues, automatic sealing devices inside tombs, water clocks, nilometers, astronomical tools, all emerging in bursts, then vanishing again. This is not the pattern of gradual technological evolution. This is the pattern of restricted traditions. Knowledge held by elite groups, revealed only when necessary and then concealed once more. Even the dead themselves reflect this secrecy. CT scans reveal medical procedures thousands of years ahead of their time. Realigned bones, examined tumours, reconstructed jaws, reinforced spines, dental wiring. Some bodies contain objects placed inside them for reasons no funerary text explains. Others show evidence of chemical experimentation or anatomical modification. And outside the royal tombs, we find mass cemeteries filled with hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 million, intentionally preserved bodies, all from people with no elite status. Methods inconsistent with official mummification. Evidence of improvisation, crisis, or something Egypt never recorded. Layer by layer, the pattern builds. Egypt responds to instability by sealing knowledge away, by erasing names, by hiding rituals, by dismantling pyramids, by burying objects deep beneath the desert, by removing entire chapters of its own story. Which brings us to the question no archaeologist can answer with certainty, the question everything we've uncovered has been leading toward. What was Egypt trying to protect? Perhaps it was dangerous medical knowledge, involving toxins, venoms, antidotes, and preservation chemistry so powerful that later generations feared its misuse. Perhaps it was a forbidden religious system, rituals tied to Thoth, Serket, Aten, or hybrid cults whose influence threatened political control. Perhaps it was a lineage of engineers, specialists capable of constructing objects and mechanisms far beyond the reach of common craftsmen. Perhaps it was a catastrophe, a famine, epidemic, or societal collapse so severe that the priesthood sought to erase it from history entirely. Or perhaps it was something still hidden beneath the sand. Radar scans of undiscovered chambers, lost pyramids buried under shifting dunes, entire cities yet to be excavated, anomalies beneath the Valley of the Kings, and 90% of Egypt's ruins still underground. Egypt didn't lose its secrets. It buried them, meticulously, deliberately, and repeatedly. The desert of Egypt is not empty. It is an archive, one that was meant to stay sealed. And after following the evidence through 11 chapters, a final realization becomes clear. Egypt was not only a civilization that built monuments, it was a civilization that concealed knowledge. When information became dangerous, destabilizing, or inconvenient, Egypt did not destroy it. It hid it beneath temples, beneath tombs, beneath pyramids, beneath entire mountains of sand. What we've uncovered so far, the missing doctor, the erased texts, the rushed burials, the hidden chambers, the engineered granite boxes, the experimental mummification, are only the fragments that escape the priesthood's control. And that leads us to the final, unavoidable question. If this is what we found in the first few meters of sand, what lies beneath the next 100? Egypt knows, the desert knows, and one day, whether by accident, by excavation, or by shifting dunes, the truth buried beneath the sands will rise again. And before we continue this journey into the forgotten world, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves ancient mysteries, and subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there are many more waiting beneath the sand.